A man stands beside a hotel pool, and with his own eyes, he sees his wife cheating on him with another man. But he doesn't rush over to confront them. He doesn't lose control right there in public. Instead, he calmly walks to the front desk and gets the keycard to their room. Then, he enters the hotel room. He looks at the messy sheets, and his face shows nothing at all. But in that moment, his real plan for revenge has already started to take shape. Not long after, his wife drives back to the estate. Her husband, Anthony, is already waiting at home. He doesn't expose her right away. He simply acts like everything is normal and calmly asks her for a hug. But tonight, his wife is exhausted. She just wants to change clothes first and then make dinner. That is, until Anthony suddenly asks her whether that man loves her. Only then does she realize her husband knows everything. Her first instinct is to apologize. But Anthony doesn't need an apology. He says the truth hurts. But pain is something he has already gotten used to. The next second, he slowly raises a gun. A shot rings out. The gardeners working outside hear the noise. They immediately drop their tools and come to the door to ask what happened. Anthony doesn't answer. He simply fires again and shatters the glass. Then he looks toward the security cameras around the estate. The gardeners are terrified and run in every direction. Anthony knows the police will arrive soon, but the truly terrifying part of this revenge isn't that he pulled the trigger. It's that from the very beginning, he seems to have been waiting for the police to arrive. Then, he starts cleaning the scene, burns the blood-stained clothes, and washes the smell of gunpowder off his body. Through the entire process, there's no panic on his face. He doesn't look like a husband who just killed his wife. He looks more like a criminal who has rehearsed this 1,000 times. Before long, the police surround the estate. When the lead officer arrives, he calls the phone inside the house and demands to negotiate with Anthony. Anthony agrees without hesitation, but he has one condition. Only the officer is allowed to enter the house. But what no one knows is that this officer is the man Anthony's wife has been sleeping with. And the most ironic part is, he and Anthony's wife have been having an affair this whole time, without knowing each other's true identity. The officer pushes open the half-closed door. Inside, he sees Anthony still holding the gun. For safety, the officer tells him to put the weapon down first. The two men test each other in silence. In the end, Anthony is the first to set the gun aside. Only then does the officer step into the room and put down his own service weapon too. He asks Anthony about his wife. Anthony only looks at him, then calmly says she probably isn't doing too well, because he just shot her. Hearing that, the officer finally realizes the woman lying in the pool of blood is the lover he has been in love with. Anthony even calmly reminds him that if he wants to check her pulse, he can feel the femoral artery on the inside of her thigh. The officer completely loses control. He grabs the gun from Anthony's hand, then tackles him to the floor, and then, he starts beating him over and over again. A large group of officers rushes into the house and pulls the furious man away. Just like that, Anthony is arrested by the police. The woman still has a faint pulse, so she is rushed to the hospital for emergency treatment. On the surface, there seems to be no mystery left in this case. The husband fired the gun, the scene was surrounded, the suspect was arrested, he even signed a written confession. But the real problem appears right at this moment. The police take the gun from Anthony's hand. Everyone assumes it must be the weapon he used to shoot his wife. But the test results come back fast. That gun has never been fired, which means the gun that shot his wife was not the one Anthony was holding. Everyone knows he fired a shot. But now, the prosecution can't find the real murder weapon. And that is the trap Anthony actually set. The next day, prosecutor Willy brings a team to search Anthony's estate. They go through almost every corner of the house, but they still can't find the real gun used in the shooting. At the scene, they only find 4 shell casings. The casings have been wiped clean. No fingerprints. 4 bullets are missing from the gun case. And there are exactly 4 shell casings on the floor. But the gun the police took from Anthony shows no sign of ever being fired. Willy realizes Anthony is playing them. He must have fired a gun, and he must have had enough time to change clothes and clean up the evidence. Besides, people were watching outside the estate the entire time. Anthony never left the house. So Willy is convinced the real gun is still inside. They just haven't found it yet. After leaving the estate, Willy goes to see Anthony again in custody. He wants to go over the evidence against him and make sure Anthony understands it before defending himself in court. But after only a few words, Anthony starts laying out Willy's entire past. He has already investigated him. Willy asks why he would do that. But Anthony fires back with a question of his own. If the prosecution is allowed to investigate him, why can't he investigate the prosecutor? He seems completely certain that as long as Willy can't find the real gun, he will never be able to convict him. Then Anthony even suggests that Willy should consider becoming his lawyer. He's willing to pay a very high fee. Of course, Willy refuses, but Anthony keeps mocking him. He says he's giving Willy a chance to join the winning side before it's too late. Faced with such open provocation, Willy makes it clear, with or without the murder weapon, he is going to bring Anthony to justice. Before leaving, Anthony tells him a story. He says his grandfather used to raise chickens for eggs. When Anthony was a child, his grandfather would make him hold a candle up to the eggs and pick out the ones with cracks or flaws. 1 hour later, his grandfather came back and found more than 300 eggs in the bucket, because Anthony had found a flaw in every single one. He says, if you look closely enough, everything has a crack. And everyone has a weakness. Willy asks him if he's trying to find his. Anthony says he already has. Willy's weakness is that he likes to win. Before long, the case officially goes to trial. Willy calls witnesses one after another, the gardeners, the police officers, the doctors, but no matter what the witnesses say, Anthony doesn't argue. He acts like he doesn't care about the trial at all. He even sits in court and starts drawing sketches like none of this matters. His behavior is so strange that even the judge looks confused, but when the lead officer takes the stand, Anthony finally fights back. In front of everyone, he exposes the truth. The officer had been having an affair with Anthony's wife. The entire courtroom is shocked, and the person most shocked is Willy, because the officer hid the most important piece of information from him. Overcome with shame, the officer gets up and leaves the courtroom. Willy realizes he has been dragged straight into Anthony's trap. But just as Willy is about to confront him, the humiliated officer loses control. He charges straight at Anthony, and his reaction only makes the jury believe Anthony's accusation may not have been baseless. After the chaos ends, the judge calls both sides into a private conference. At first, the judge believes Anthony is deliberately smearing the officer, but Anthony quickly gives his explanation. He says he has proof that his wife and the officer were having an affair, because he had already hired a private investigator. Using that as his opening, Anthony starts attacking the entire case against him. He says that on the night of the shooting, the officer violently beat him. He was afraid for his own safety, and he was afraid the officer would threaten him again at the police station. That is why, according to Anthony, he was forced to sign the confession. After all, the officer had a personal grudge against him, and the police station was the officer's territory. If that officer had any part in questioning him, then the confession could have been coerced. And once the confession is thrown out, the prosecution's most important evidence falls apart with it. Anthony's argument has almost no holes. Even the judge starts to believe him. Willy can see that Anthony has set a trap, but the law runs on evidence. So the judge gives Willy 3 days to find new proof of Anthony's guilt. If he can't find anything within those 3 days, Anthony may walk out a free man. Not long after, Willy returns to the prosecutor's office completely defeated. His boss has been waiting for him. Because of Willy's carelessness and arrogance, the case is now in serious trouble. His boss decides he can no longer stay in charge of it. In his eyes, Willy walked into court completely unprepared, arrogant, lazy, and now no one knows how much damage he has caused. That night, Willy returns to his apartment. At the door, he finds a box. It was sent by Anthony. Inside is only a broken eggshell. Willy immediately thinks back to the story Anthony told him. If you look closely enough, sooner or later, you will find the fatal crack. Faced with Anthony's mockery, Willy decides to pull himself together. Early the next morning, he goes to his boss and asks to take the case back. This time, Willy's determination finally makes his boss hesitate. In the end, his boss agrees, but he also warns him. If Willy loses this time, he won't just be fired from the prosecutor's office. He may also lose the job waiting for him at the new law firm. With permission granted, Willy immediately starts investigating again. First, he goes to see the officer. By this point, the officer's life has completely fallen apart. After the affair was exposed, his wife and children left him. Reporters are now swarming outside his home, so he has no choice but to hide in a hotel. Willy asks him about Anthony's wife, hoping to find a new lead. The officer says he never knew his lover's real identity. Both of them had families, so, to avoid destroying each other's marriages, they never revealed who they really were. They simply met at the same hotel twice a week. At first, it was just an arrangement between them, but over time, their feelings became more than just an affair. Willy angrily blames the officer, but the officer lashes out at Willy instead. He says he warned Willy from the beginning that Anthony was smart, but Willy never listened. After leaving the officer, Willy goes to that hotel. He checks the room where the two lovers used to meet, but he finds nothing useful. Then, he pulls the hotel surveillance footage. In the video from the day of the shooting, he spots Anthony, but Anthony has covered himself up carefully. The camera never captures a clear shot of his face, so the footage can't be used as solid evidence. Clearly, Anthony had already expected the police to check the cameras. But one thing still doesn't make sense to Willy. On the day of the shooting, why didn't Anthony catch them in the act at the hotel? Why did he go to their room first instead? What exactly did he do in there? Unable to find the flaw, Willy grows more and more anxious. There is only 1 day left before the deadline, so he has no choice but to search the estate again. But the real murder weapon seems to have vanished from the face of the earth. No matter where they look, they can't find it. Now, the only person who might know the truth is Anthony's wife, but she is still unconscious. For now, the doctors have managed to keep her alive, but the bullet is still inside her brain, and even if she wakes up, there is a strong chance she will be left in a vegetative state. Just when Willy has no idea what to do, the officer comes to see him that night. He offers an illegal solution. He wants to use his position to swap the shell casings and create new evidence. That way, they can convict Anthony. It is clearly against the law, but deep down, both of them know Anthony is the killer. They just don't have the evidence to prove it. Facing the officer's illegal proposal, Willy is torn. On one side, there is the law and his conscience. On the other, there is his career and the chance to win the case. Willy doesn't give the officer a clear answer. He simply turns and walks away. But after thinking about it all night, Willy finally starts to waver. The next day, when Willy arrives at the office, he calls his assistant into his room. He tells her to bring her phone and sit outside the courtroom. If he calls her, she should hang up, walk into the courtroom, and quietly pretend to whisper in his ear that they found the real gun. His assistant asks if they actually found it. Willy doesn't answer. He only says he hasn't decided yet. Before long, the case reaches its final hearing. Willy and his assistant arrive at the courthouse. Outside, reporters are already packed around the entrance. The officer is there too. The two men exchange a look, and the officer immediately understands that Willy may have already made his choice. But Anthony has come prepared as well. In court, he makes a request. He asks the judge to dismiss the case and release him as not guilty. His reason is simple. The prosecution has no solid evidence that proves he committed the crime. He points out that the prosecution's witnesses can only prove one thing. His wife was shot, and he was inside the house at the time. But that does not prove he was the one who pulled the trigger. He even paints himself as a victim too. Under the rule of insufficient evidence, Anthony asks the court to declare him not guilty and let him walk free. The judge turns to Willy and asks whether the prosecution has any new evidence. Willy stands there, opens the contacts on his phone, and looks at the screen. His assistant is waiting right outside the courtroom. All he has to do is press the call button. Then everything will go exactly according to the plan. But his finger just won't move. In the end, Willy chooses to hold the line. He tells the judge the prosecution has no new evidence. The judge grants Anthony's request for acquittal. Anthony is released right there in court. Willy keeps his professional integrity, but he also watches with his own eyes as a killer walks free. He sits there, helpless and furious. Outside the courtroom, the officer completely breaks down. Then Willy gets a call from his girlfriend. She has heard that he lost the case, and she tries to comfort him. But while they are still on the phone, a gunshot suddenly rings out. Willy immediately rushes over to see what happened. The officer has shot himself. He couldn't live with this ending. His career is over. His family is gone. His reputation is destroyed. For him, staying alive may have been more painful than death. And with the officer dead, Anthony has almost achieved exactly what he wanted. Not long after, Anthony goes to the evidence room and retrieves his personal belongings. Then, under police escort, he returns to the estate safe and untouched. But Anthony still has one thing left to finish: his wife, lying in the hospital. Early the next morning, Anthony arrives at her hospital room. Willy has been there all night. Anthony keeps mocking the man he has already beaten. Willy has nothing to say. All he can do is walk quickly out of the hospital. But before he leaves, Anthony reminds him that his wife's life is now being kept going entirely by machines. And those machines will stop working the moment someone pulls the plug. The truly terrifying part is, Anthony now has the legal right to make that decision. He can decide when to end his wife's life support. So this is Anthony's final plan. As long as he pulls the plug on his wife's oxygen equipment, he can legally finish killing her. Anthony's cold-bloodedness cuts straight into Willy's conscience, and it makes him blame himself even more. Maybe from the very beginning, he never took this case seriously enough. Willy decides he can't just sit back and watch this happen. He has to stop Anthony. So he goes to his boss, hoping the judge can revoke Anthony's right to make medical decisions for his wife. But what Willy doesn't expect is that Anthony has already gone to court first and filed for a restraining order. If Willy gets anywhere near Anthony's wife again, the police will arrest him. Willy's boss also reminds him that Anthony has already been acquitted. Now, he is just a private citizen. The prosecutor's office no longer has any standing to interfere. Meanwhile, Anthony has already signed the order to end his wife's life support. The doctors are giving her one final examination, preparing to shut down the machine, keeping her breathing. Willy, however, refuses to give up. Through legal channels, he manages to obtain a court order against Anthony. Then he immediately rushes to the hospital. But when he reaches the hospital room, it is already too late. Anthony's plan has worked. His wife is dead. Not long after, Willy also loses his job because of the case, but he still can't let it go. That night, he returns to the prosecutor's office and goes through Anthony's file again. Just then, a coworker is about to leave. As the two of them talk, the coworker realizes he picked up the wrong phone. They both have the same model. After Willy gets his own phone back, he sees that the caller is Anthony. Anthony is calling to say goodbye. He had planned to take his wife on their honeymoon. Now, he'll have to go alone. And even over the phone, Anthony's voice is still full of mockery. But this call is exactly what makes Willy finally see the real flaw. He finally understands why Anthony went to the hotel room on the day of the shooting. And he finally understands where the real murder weapon went. By now, Anthony has already packed his bags. He is ready to take a plane and disappear for good. But then, Willy suddenly shows up at his door, and in his hand is Anthony's gun. Willy tells him he has found the key detail. Anthony's gun is the exact same model as the officer's service weapon, which means on the afternoon of the shooting, Anthony didn't go to the hotel to catch his wife in the act. He went there to enter their room and take the officer's gun. Then, he used the officer's gun to shoot his wife. After that, he swapped in his own gun and gave it back to the officer. The officer never noticed a thing, because all of his attention was on his lover. Later, the officer walked out of Anthony's house with the real murder weapon on his waist. And during the trial, the only piece of physical evidence was actually sitting in the officer's holster the entire time. Even more ironically, the officer later used that same gun to take his own life. Only now does the truth finally come out. Anthony's plan was almost perfect, but there was one thing he never expected. The bullet still lodged in his wife's brain had already been sent by Willy for ballistics testing. As long as that bullet matches the officer's gun, the real murder weapon will finally be found. Even with his scheme exposed, Anthony still doesn't panic. Instead, he starts bragging about the moment he fired the shot. He says he shot his wife from the front. He watched her fall, watched the life slowly drain from her eyes. He remembers the smell of blood, and he remembers the desperate look on the officer's face as he tried to save her. To Anthony, that single shot punished both his wife and her lover. Even now, Anthony is still fearless, because he believes he has already been found not guilty in this same case, and the law cannot try a man twice for the same crime. But this time, Willy came prepared. He reminds Anthony that during the first trial, the charge was attempted murder, because at that time, his wife was still alive. But later, Anthony personally pulled the plug on her life support. Now his wife is dead. The nature of the case has changed. This is now first-degree murder, a new charge, new evidence, which means he can be prosecuted again. Only now does Anthony finally realize that the final move he made himself has become the new flaw in his plan. If he hadn't pulled the plug, his wife might have stayed alive, but he needed her dead, and that gave Willy the chance to bring him back to court. Not long after, Anthony stands in court again, but this time, the charge is murder, and unlike before, he finally has a professional legal team by his side. But this time, he may not be able to walk away so easily, and that is where the movie ends. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy movies about locked rooms, deadly rules, and human nature pushed to the edge, make sure to subscribe. This channel brings you more high-concept thrillers, psychological traps, and survival stories. See you in the next movie.